Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. The other day, I was asked to give a talk about one of my books. It was very nice, but the best thing, I didn't get the usual flowers or a bottle of wine, but they gave me gift certificates for books. So off I went the next day, of course, to buy books, and I thought I'd share them with you. So there's 6 books in total that I want to talk to you about, and in case you're wondering, that must have been some gift certificate. I mean, it was generous, but I couldn't have bought 6 new books. So the first 3 are used books that I found in the used book section of the bookstore. And the first one is my first Barbara Pym, Some Tame Gazelle, first published in 1950, her debut novel. And yes, I admitted I had never read Barbara Pym. And I know you are now looking at me with incredulous wonderment and bafflement. I know. It's one of those things, that BookTube changed, especially Sean from Sean the Book Maniac, because he loves Barbara Pym and he talks about her books a lot, and that made me want to finally read Barbara Pym. In my defense, I have to say, Barbara Pym, she died 1980, and she published between 1950 and her death, and some books were published after her death, but only one of her books, the second one, Excellent Women, was translated into German. So when I became a reader, in the 1970s, I read in German, and her books weren't available to me. And later on, when I did read in English, I have to say, for some reason, I thought Barbara Pym wrote fluffy romance. I have no idea how I came to that stupid conclusion, but there you go. So BookTube changed my mind. Thank you, Sean. This, like I said, is her debut novel. Oh, and I should also say that I thought her career as a writer, because I write myself, is interesting, because her first couple of books between in the 1950s, early 1960s, were quite successful, and then there is a gap of almost 15 years when she couldn't get anything published. Her regular publisher, Jonathan Cape, didn't want to publish her books anymore, thought them old-fashioned. And it was only in the mid-late 1970s that an article was published talking about her in a literary magazine, talking about her and her work and how underrated she was. And then her career sort of got a second chance and a revival. Stories like that, for some reason, always give me hope. Anyway, Some Tame Gazelle is about 2 sisters, spinsters, living in the countryside, and one is always, as I understood from Sean and from the blurb, always interested in the new curator of the village, and the other one has a long-standing admiration for a friend of hers whom she met in college, who has long since been married. And it's about the everyday life of these 2 sisters. And I expect it to be humorous, because that's what people talk about most when they talk about Pym, that she is so witty and that you laugh at the characters, but at the same time that her writing is full of empathy. So it's not the bad laugh that we call in German Schadenfreude, the joy of seeing other people do stupid things, but it's full of empathy. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope that I will love this book as much as Sean did. The next book I found is by a writer that I do read and did read, but not this particular one, and that's Elizabeth Bowen, The Heat of the Day, first published in 1948. Jesus, I'm so excited about the books. I can't even get my words out straight. Elizabeth Bowen was an Irish writer. She was born just before the turn of the century, 1899, died in 1973. She published extensively fiction, short story collections, but also non-fiction. And she is most famous, I think, for her writing about everyday life experiences during the Second World War. And this one is no exception. You have the main character, Stella, who lives just, it's set in London, 1942, and she is caught up in espionage conspiracy because her lover, Robert, is suspected to have sold secrets to the enemy. I really love Elizabeth Bowen, so if you have never read her, please try her out. And most of her books, or at least not most, but good portion of her books are perfect choices for one of the read-alongs that are organized at the moment, and that's Gone with the Book, organized by Mel over at Mel's Bookland Adventure. If you've never heard of it, I will leave a link to the Goodreads group down below, but in short, it's a read-along that takes place in the last week of the months of September, that has been gone, and October and November. And the idea is to read a book published between 1900 and 1949 or 1950, depending on how you interpret the rules, but in the first 50 years of last century. And this would be a perfect fit. So I'm looking forward to reading this for Gone with the Book, but I'm looking forward to reading it anyway. And I can certainly recommend Elizabeth Bowen if you have never read her. And the last one of the used books is a modern classic, Edith Wharton book, The House of Mirth, first published in 1905. If you're following my channel, you know that Edith Wharton, I just love her work. The Age of Innocence is one of my favorite books. I think her writing is brilliant. She was an American author, by the way, mid-19th century until, mid-20th century. And she writes about New York, quote-unquote, high society in a very, I don't want to say sarcastic, but critical kind of way, and especially about the choices women have in that society. I read House of Mirth way back when, but as with many English language classics, I read it in German, so will be my first read in the original English. The main character, Lily, is a beautiful young woman, quite poor, but she's nevertheless accepted into high society, and she has to find a rich husband. She's nearing 30 now, so not that young anymore, certainly not for the standards in those days. And I'm really excited and looking forward to revisiting this book in a way, reading it for the first time, because it's my first time in English. And it will be a buddy read in December with Brian from Bookish. So looking forward to discussing this book with you, Brian. Then on to the 3 new books I bought, not necessarily newly published. The first one is Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider, collection of her essays and speeches. Now, Audre Lorde was a black radical feminist, activist. I don't need to talk about her. You know who she was. I read bits and pieces of her work, but I never read a collection. So when I saw this in the beautiful, Penguin Classic edition, I of course had to buy it, and I'm very much looking forward to again get myself acquainted with her work, because I think she is such an important thinker, certainly now, with feminism and Me Too and all these discussion about intersectionality, meaning that, feminism is often very white. I think it has been an important work anyway, her speeches and essays. So I'm babbling. I'm just looking forward to reading it. And if you have never read Audre Lorde, you should. And I'll stop here now. And the next one is indeed a new release, and that's Deborah Levy's new book, The Man Who Saw Everything, published earlier this year, longlisted for the Man Booker. Didn't make the shortlist, unfortunately. But there you go. Not talking about the Booker, as you know, until next year. Deborah Levy is a British author. She was born in South Africa, 1959, and I really love her work. She writes, she's a playwright, a poet, novels, but also nonfiction. If you watch my recent videos, you know how much I love this autobiographical series, The Cost of Living, things you don't want to talk about. Yeah, I think she's a very interesting, engaging, intelligent writer. I don't know too much about this book because I bought it because it's by by Deborah Levy, but I do know that we have a main character, a young man in 1988 in London, who then moves to East Berlin and encounters people there. It's set in various timelines, if I understand it correctly. And to be honest, I do not want to know more than that. I mean, I've seen review videos, but I didn't watch them because I want to go into this book basically only knowing the bare outlines of the story. But of course, I will report back once I've read the book. And the last book I want to talk to you about is one of these surprise finds. You know, when you browse a bookstore looking for certain books or books that you see and you recognize, and then you come across something you've never heard of, you look at it, you read the blurb, and you buy it. And that is a nonfiction book, At Home in the World. Can you see the writers? Maria Di Battista and Deborah Epstein Nord, published in 2017. And it just drew me in from what it says, women writers and public life from Austen to the present. How can you not buy that? After I bought it, I did a little research. Both authors teach, they are scholars, talking about female novels. And in this book, from what I understood, they examine a wide range of authors, like it said, from Austen to the present, and try to do away with the myth that mostly females write about domestic life. And their claim is that many of the female writers that they examine do incorporate in their work the outside world and the tension between the domestic world and the outside world. That's all I know, but like I said, I just picked this up because it sounded so interesting. Anyway, that was my gift certificate October book haul. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments whether you read any of the books that I talked about or are interested in reading any of them, and I will see you all soon in the next one. Bye bye.